What's up, sixth graders? This is the second to last section for this unit, so I'm sure you're all super happy about that. This is Eastern Europe and Western Russia, the history of the regions. So our essential question here is, how do governments change? Do they change because of war? Do they change because people just decided to make a change and voting and things like that? Or do they, go in because somebody left out of power or somebody died, something like that? Got all our terms to know. All the history sections, they have this cool little timeline here. So this one's not going back super far, only going back around 400 years or so. Starting at 1721, we have some information about the Russian Empire all the way up until 1991 when the Soviet Union ends. That's kind of the main thing about this area. All right, number one, read the text on the left, circle the locations where Slavic people settled in Europe. What you have right here, Slavs, who they are, they're this ethnic group and blah, 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 blah. Originally from Asia, they settled in what is now Ukraine and Poland. Simple enough. All right, let's flip the page, go to number two. Okay, we need to highlight the major ethnic groups that live in Western Russia. Well, there are, I think, 4 of them or so. So, here we go. Ethnic Russians make up the majority of the population. There's also this group of people called Magyars. There are Romanians, that's kind of southwestern. Slavs. Ethnic Russians and Slavs are actually very, very similar. Sometimes you'll see them as the same thing, sometimes they're different. Ukrainians, which, if you've ever met Miss Howerton, she is from Ukraine, so she identifies as Ukrainian and she has a super cool accent. There's a bunch of other ones. Russia is actually a very big multicultural nation. All right, number 3. We need to use the word serf in a sentence. So the easiest way to do that is understanding what a serf is. They're farm laborers, so the easiest way to put that in a sentence is serfs farm, probably should spell that right, farm for their nobles. These are basically like the laborers, the workers on the farms and things like that, and then the nobles are the people who kind of paid them, they lived on their lands, things like that. All right, our next one, number 4. How did Catherine the Great expand the empire? So she was a super, super cool ruler. If you notice, the Great is actually a thing that gets repeated a couple times here. So what they did is she encouraged, well, this is expanding the empire, isn't it? She took over, so let's make that a T, took over northern coast of the Black Sea. Russia really had a really grand time with her as their ruler. They also, if you look, they had the development of education, journalism, architecture, theater. A lot of the things that Europe's known for, or not Europe, Russia is known for, kind of came under Catherine the Great. She really helped modernize the nation at one point. All right, number 5. What event led to the outbreak of World War I? Well, you should already know this one, but we already have it right here. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated. Sometimes a lot of textbooks, they'll always refer to this as the same thing. They'll always call it the powder keg that started the war. A lot of times they would also have a reference to his wife, Sophie, and they always referred to her as his lovely wife, Sophie. But they were actually both killed. They got into at that point in time, since it was 1914, they got into a carriage, and this dude ran up and just shot them both in the carriage. All right, moving on to number 6, hopefully less depressing than number 5. All right, number 6, read the text on the left, underline the sentence that tells why the Russian people turned against the Tsar. So the Russian people were very upset in terms of what was going on in their country and why they were very upset about it, because a lot of things were going wrong with the Tsars. They had a lot of military failures, specifically talking about like World War I stuff, a very high casualty rate, and they also had a lot of food shortages. So you ended up with people who were just starving in the streets. All right, number 7, what was the relationship between the Bolsheviks and the Communist Party? So the Bolsheviks, they were the ones that actually created it. So they created the Communist Party in Russia that eventually ended up ruling the country for like 70 years. So we'll put Bolsheviks created the, and we'll capitalize communist since it is a proper noun in this one, party. Okay. Number 8, why did landowners protest the collectivization of agriculture? So collectivization, he forced collectivization collectivization of all agriculture so that all farmland was owned and controlled by the government. So obviously they protest because Stalin was taking land for the government. This is land that people owned. So essentially it'd be like, if your parents owned your house or something like that, if the government came by and they were like, you know what, this is our land now, and they took it, which technically they can do. But in this instance, it works for, why someone would be mad. I mean, if somebody came up and they were like, you know what, your backpack's now mine, you'd be a little bit upset about that too. All right, number 9, how did the USSR come to control most of Eastern Europe? So after World War I, they occupied, or after World War II, USSR occupied Eastern Russia, or Eastern Europe. They basically just, since they were already there, after pushing back the Nazis and stuff during World War II, they were like, you know what, we're already here, let's just stay. And that's what they did. All right, moving on to number 10. Okay, read the text on the right, underline the sentence that explained what NATO and the Warsaw Pact were. So right here you have this. The United States and its allies created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949. NATO members agreed to respond as a group if any person was attacked. And then you also have this second one here. The USSR responded to NATO by creating its own alliance with its nearby countries. Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania all joined into the USSR on that. Okay, so what was solidarity? So this was something that the Polish people did in order to help out during their occupation by the Soviet Union. It was an organization of Polish trade unions. Because when you're owned and controlled by a communist government, economics is not really a big thing that you're going to have, because everything is everyone's and they share it equally, unless you are the group in control, in which case you're keeping most of it to yourselves, so that way you stay in power, you stay wealthy, and you don't have to worry about people, eventually rising up. All right, number 12, how did the Soviet Union's policy of glasnost affect the governments of Eastern Europe? It allowed the governments to change. And we'll just, governments change to more independent control. Because at one point, the Soviet Union, they just had a very tight grip on all of their Eastern European countries. With glasnost, they kind of started to reel that back in and allow those countries to have a little bit more control over their own stuff. All right, so another timeline. We're going to do another vertical one, same as before. Alrighty, so we're going to start with 1968 with Dodček, which is how you say that guy's name, and we'll put CZ for Czechoslovakia. Then in 1980, we have Solidarity happening in Poland. And then again in 1980, so we'll just put a bullet point, we have the Glasnost and Perestroika, which I'm sure if I'm saying these, I'm sure that Miss Howerton can say them much better than I can. And then in 1989, Solidarity was legalized. This is actually going to go on a little bit longer than the space we have. Okay, so in 1990, you have new governments in some of the countries. We're just going to put new governments, and we'll leave it at that. And then over here, we'll put 1991. Move that so you guys can actually see it. Soviet Union dissolved. The Soviet Union dissolving, the first Desert Storm, and then apartheid ending in South Africa were probably three of the biggest news stories of the early 90s when I was a kid. All right, moving on to our last one for history. We've only got 2 more questions and then the writing prompts. Why do you think the Soviet Union dissolved when communist control ended? So I'm going to leave that one blank because this is you think. So it's not really a wrong answer as long as you actually write an answer. All right, number 15. How did Glasnost and Perestroika affect the USSR? It gave people more freedoms, and it led to the end of the USSR. And symbol led to end of USSR. All right, and that is the end of history. We've got 2 writing prompts that you'll have to work on. Which of the 2 world wars do you think had a greater effect on the course of history in Western Russia and Eastern Europe? And then tell me why. So was it World War I or was it World War II? And then explain. Second one, how was the Cold War different from other kinds of wars? You should know a little bit about this already. There is more information in here on the Cold War as well. And I will see you guys next time for Lesson 3, the end of Eastern Europe and Western Russia and this entire unit.